talking about improvements as well as, maybe another little uphill struggle that's going to come for landlords, which would potentially be the EPC changes. So
massively, yeah.
There's talks of EPC change now. It's not gone through, it's not been finalised, but if they do come in from 2025, you are going to see a lot of, depending where the demographic of the housing, how old is it, how achievable is it to get those EPC ratings to where they need to be.
Yeah.
You could see some landlords needing to spend 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 to improve the properties to be able to re-let it.
Yeah.
And it is, like we've said all the way through, it's about planning your finances and being aware of something now so you can plan over the next few years. Right, am I going to need to release some money from this buy-to-let to cover all that work? Is that achievable? Do I need to dip into my savings? And it's just knowing, are you going to be in a position where you need to?
Yeah, I think we could definitely do with knowing some more clarity on what the government want us to do with the. I know there's some guidelines out there, and there's some provisional talks of 2025 and C rating, etc., etc. But in the reality world, from a lender, if the lenders are going to say, if you can't get to a C, we're not lending any money against it. There are some properties that just physically won't be able to get to a C. And I've got a major investor who has 30, 40 properties in the city centre where he's either inherited or he's bought big old Georgian Victorian buildings, which the ability to get those to a C, without turfing all your tenants out, taking it back to brick, starting again, which, effectively he's going to have void periods for months and months and months to get to that period, is going to be a huge task. And I think the sooner there can be some clarity on, is it going to happen? Well, I know the government have got lots of other things to worry about at the moment, but it would be very useful for you as advisors, us as agents to advise them. How are we going to plan this into the diary? Because it can't just get into the end of 2023 and the end of 2024 and then we've got to do it, because there will be a mass exodus of rental properties in the market, which will only hamper those who are trying to get into the rental market. And we've already got issues with rental prices being at the levels that they're at, and it's eye-watering some of the prices that have been achieved. But it simply comes down to a supply, doesn't it? And if that supply gets less and less, it's only going to go one way. So it's going to be a really, really valid point, I think, you make on the EPC world. You can read as much as you want on it, but until the government come out and give us a little bit more clarity on it. We had our EPC provider in only a few weeks ago, and Neil's come up with a great idea where he's doing some pre-reports for landlords and for homeowners, if you want, where he will go out for the cost of a little bit more than an EPC, go out and give you an EPC rating as we are now, doesn't register it, will then give you a report that says, these are all the deals that you can get, this is what you need to get to, and this is what your rating will be. And then after you've done all that, he'll go back and do that report for you. And we've pushed it to quite a few of our landlords, and it looks as though there'll be some uptake on it. But, it shouldn't take for Neil in York to be having to do that.
Realistically, I think, given the silence around it, I wouldn't be that surprised to see it get kicked down.
I think it'll get moved on.
We've got a bit more on the plate.
I agree. Just while we're talking about deposits, have you seen any shift in deposits on a homeowner's, just expected deposit? You mentioned 5% earlier on.
Yeah, for residential, fairly much the same. I mean, through COVID, at the beginning of COVID times, a lot of lenders took away 5% deposits, 10% deposits, some took away 15% deposits, but we're fairly back to normal now in terms of deposit levels.
I don't know who I was talking to. It was somebody in the mortgage world, but...
must have been us.
It must have been you guys. I don't know if it was a buyer's... Anyway, it doesn't matter who it was, but there was some talk that it didn't matter quite so much now, that, you always used to get to 25% as your magic number.
It was us.
It might have been you I was talking to. I can't remember who it was. But has that changed? Is it a bit different now?
Yeah, so there's notoriously, if you had a 5% deposit or a 10% deposit, your interest rate would be quite different to if you had a 40% deposit. But what we had seen, over the past 6, 12 months is the sort of gap between those become smaller and smaller. We are maybe seeing now just it starts to increase slightly again, which is strange for the mortgage market, because usually, notoriously, the bigger deposit you had, the better rates were. But sometimes you could have been looking at 0.1, 0.2, maybe a difference. To
the point where it was kind of not worth putting down either.
So you might as well keep holding your cash in the bank.
In certain instances, it did, like you said, definitely that gap is starting to widen. widen again. Just going back to the buy-to-lets, one area that we didn't cover off that is actually doing pretty well is the holiday lets.
Yes, yeah.
And I guess York is maybe a little bit of an anomaly, in that instance. But we do see, loads of landlords looking at switching to holiday lets, or people, first-time landlords looking at holiday lets, and the income.
I think there's a huge caveat to put in there, John, which for people who are watching, is that the holiday market is one that seems to be relatively lucrative, but people must ensure that they've got the right permissions in place, and the leases, if they're buying apartments, do allow them to do so. Because speaking to a local holiday let agent recently, they have had a number of landlords who are now having to sell because the managing agents of properties have realise that they're actually in breach of their leases, which is clearly in breach of any mortgages that they might have.
Sure.
So I think it's really clear that yes, there's quite a lucrative market there with a holiday for the right property in the right location. But if you're going to do it by the book, which we would obviously advise people always to do. But I think the holiday. I think the only thing we're going to be probably careful with is in York is that whilst we've got a huge audience, haven't we, in terms of tourism that are going to come here, it's the multiple blocks of holiday lets which might start falling into HMO rulings and licences. It's going to be really interesting for me over the coming years to see whether they start taking the same. Local government taking the same views as they have done in other parts of the country, and particularly Eastern Coast towns and such like that. They're going to put restrictions on how many days they can be, but I certainly think in the short term there's a gap there, as long as it doesn't get saturated. I
was just going to say I'm yet to see one not stack up and not work in York, but you'd imagine there may come a point where it starts to get a little bit more difficult, and I think there has been talk of maybe even licensing them, which obviously would be another. But
it'll come back to what we said before about supply and demand. The prices are high in the holiday let world because there's there's quite a few, but the more that come into the market,
and the standard will improve, because the only way you'll be able to compete is if you have the really nice, specced out places, and all of a sudden then that. Is going to improve.
I have to say the Airbnb, Booking.com world in York, it seems to have a very, very high standard.
It's all come from the COVID reset, that hasn't it? In terms of how people go on holiday rather than going abroad. They've actually sort of utilised what we've got in this country.
But it all links again, doesn't it? That we were talking about taxes before, that in the holiday let world, there's more tax reliefs.
Yeah, there are.
You can offset far more tax. So, it's almost like the government have said, well, we'll tax you a load on this. They don't want all these holiday lets, but actually, if you go into holiday, we'll give you much more tax relief. So, they're throwing landlords from.
You do wonder whether they'll close that, because it's a nice, easy win, isn't it? No one's going to complain, are they? It's one of those. But I think, going back to what you said, we do just need to be careful as a city that it doesn't become, just a holiday destination, and all the city centre flats are just empty during the week and then rammed at the weekend.
I think I've got huge sympathy for those who have lived on a terraced house in the city centre for 20 years, and they've had nice tenants or nice neighbours, whether they be tenants or whether they be homeowners, for 20 years, and then all of a sudden someone puts a loft conversion in and puts 4 lettable rooms out of it, or 2 flats in it, and then all of a sudden there's party comers and stag do's and hen do's and all male or female parties that are in there. I think those are the properties that the council and the governments have got every right to put some
like
restrictions
you say, right
in
property,
place.
right location.
But you and the wife decide, we're going to go to York for the weekend, and you find a lovely little apartment on the river or whatever it might be that has permission to run as a holiday let. Then I think that's a good way to come and enjoy the city, and that's something that we should be encouraging as a city, not trying to be difficult with. But have you seen? Has there been much change in the in the rates for people, because it's more of a commercial loan, isn't it, than a residential buy-to-let loan?
So with holiday lets, you have a much smaller pool of lenders to fish in, basically, than a normal buy-to-let. And going back to what you said, Oliver, it's important that you have the right mortgage for a holiday let, because if you have a standard buy-to-let product on a holiday let, you potentially could be in breach of your mortgage conditions. So one thing is important is speak to a broker when you're looking at a holiday let, because they will have probably the widest reach of options for holiday lets out of the small options that are there. And they are tested differently on affordability. So a lot of them, they'll take a low season, mid-season, high season and base it on that amount of rent, where you might get others that will only value it on what you'd be getting on a normal AST. So there's a big difference in what you can borrow between the lenders as well. But rate-wise, we have seen increases in rates with holiday lets, maybe a tiny bit higher than the sort of normal residential buy-to-let, but probably around where they should be in line with market conditions at the minute.
Yeah, I should say with holiday lets, generally speaking, you would normally be able to go up to 75% loan to value because the rental income's normally much higher. You don't have that issue that you have with a standard buy-to-let where you need a 40, 50% deposit in York. They would normally stack up at the sort of higher loan to values.
Fine.
I'm going to ask the $1 million question. How do you think this year's going to go in terms of the mortgage rates? Are we going to see a better sort of year this year than with what we saw sort of back end of last year? Because how you guys are in the mortgage world dictates how the marketplace is and how that plays out. So I think for the majority of our listeners and me personally as well, how that's going to be, this year, we're going to see a new norm at the rates that they are now, or they're going to go up, they're going to go down. Just interested to get your views.
New norm's the definite, the word there. I think anyone who's sitting around hoping or waiting for rates to get back down to 1 or 2%, as it stands, going to be waiting a long time because it's just not on the horizon. And I think certainly from what we're seeing, rates have definitely come down from where they were. So they sort of peaked, I would have said October-ish sort of time, November maybe, towards the end of last year, and they've been slowly coming down. Fixed rates, yeah. And we've hit like 2 weeks ago maybe, had the first sub 4% deals come back into the market, and that is only is a positive thing, and hopefully that will continue. And I think if we could get somewhere between 3-4%, that might become the sort of new norm.
And it is so relative, isn't it? Because when you mentioned there the mortgage rates at the back end of last year, I know notoriously for the housing market the back end of the year is quiet, but at Selby we had a very quiet sort of back end of October, November, December, and it's tied in with exactly what you've just said there in terms of higher rates.
Yeah, a lot of it was kind of like paralysis, like everyone just kind of stopped what they were doing.
Yeah, panic stations.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we had loads of people put stuff off, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I think notoriously at the end of the year, it usually slows down in the housing market towards Christmas, but I think there was sort of double trouble maybe at the end of last year. There was a lot of uncertainty.
I think a confidence thing as well.
Yeah, a confidence knock. Whereas I think now we've settled into a period where there's a bit more clarity, and people will maybe start to make those decisions again. But lenders do want to lend. They're there to lend, and they have their targets to meet, the amount that they need to lend out. And we've seen a bit of a price war at the beginning of the year on fixed rates, and that's why you'll see them coming down and down. Whether they remain at those levels, and depending on what the Bank of England does, over the coming months, is yet to be seen. But it's been good news at the minute at the start of the year on fixed rates.
There seems to be a lot more positivity in terms of the interest rates this year.
I think if you look at affordability with rates at 5, 6, 6.5%, it just doesn't look good. It's difficult to see how the housing market could really flourish. If you then replace that with rates at 3.5%, it's a completely different picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think if we could get to that point, things would start to sort of loosen up a bit more.
I know one of the biggest questions Tom and I will be asked on a weekly basis is now the right time to buy? And I know what our answer is. My answer is always that if you need to move or you want to move and the finances allow and it's a medium to long term purchase, then absolutely get on with it. What would your advice to be anyone who's looking to buy at the moment?
I think just make sure it's the right time for you. It's all personal perception on, do you need to move? Is it the right time to move? What will that move give you? And we speak to a lot of people, and so many people are now sort of concentrated on the investment side of buying a house as opposed to what it actually gives you lifestyle, memories that it makes. And if you're going to start a family there, if you're going to be there 5-10 years, why worry whether, you might buy it and then it might dip a little or house prices might drop a couple of percentage points? Because if you think long term, it's going to give you a lot more out of your lifestyle than worrying about the investment side of things. Yeah. But in terms of if you're looking at buying, what I would say is, pick the phone up, speak to a broker, even if it's not us, if you know someone who's used a broker before, there is no charge for speaking to someone like us. It could be a 10-15 minute phone call that makes what you think is the unachievable, achievable, and put you in a completely different position for the year ahead.
And I think that probably moves on to, you'll have to tell us so the guys that are watching know or listening will know how to contact you. What's the best way to get hold of you guys?
I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, so you can look us up on Google. So we've got some great Google reviews. We've got a website that covers sort of all the product ranges that we do. Pick the phone up, phone number's on there, drop us an email, find us on Instagram, LinkedIn. on social platforms as well.
We'll put all your details in the details below.
Much appreciated.
John, Graham,
thank you.
For joining us.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Spot on.
Is that the practice run?